The ninth rule that we will examine, which will contribute to strengthening your writing, is throw out needless words. The key is to make every word add meaning. Powerful writing is concise. There should be no unnecessary words. Each word should have a purpose, just as each part of your smartphone has a purpose. Students often get carried away with meeting a specific word count requirement. This often leads them to write meaningless words simply to fill space. But word count limits are there so that you know how much depth and breadth your topic requires. If you're asked to write a 500-word essay on sustainable development, then you're basically giving a summary of the concept, or maybe one aspect of the concept. But if you're asked to write a 2,000-word essay, then you must really delve into the topic. If halfway through your essay or paragraph you run out of things to say, that means you need to go back and do more research. Throwing out needless words can be done through various strategies, which include using the active voice rather than the passive voice, and we've talked about that already. Using the positive form rather than the negative form, and we've also discussed that. Combining simple sentences to make a compound sentence, for example. Turning clauses into phrases, and avoiding wordy expressions. All right, let's take a look at an example of how we can combine simple sentences in order to make our writing more concise. Okay, so in the example to the left, we have a passage on Macbeth, and it's a total of 51 words. Okay, so let me read through it slowly. And as I'm reading it, think of the words that can be removed and the sentences that can be combined. Macbeth was very ambitious. This led him to wish to become King of Scotland. The witches told him that this wish of his would come true. The King of Scotland at this time was Duncan. Encouraged by his wife, Macbeth murdered Duncan. He was thus enabled to succeed Duncan as king. All right, now compare that with the concise version. Okay, so the meaning is the same, but I've basically expressed that meaning in 25 fewer words. Okay. Encouraged by his wife, Macbeth achieved his ambition and realized the prediction of the witches by murdering Duncan and becoming King of Scotland in his place. So this concise version is actually just one sentence. Compare that to the original, which was more than 5 sentences. So there's obviously a big difference in terms of sentence structure, and oftentimes making your writing more academic and making it more concise is as simple as combining your simple sentences to form one large sentence. Here we have another example of how combining simple sentences can make our writing much more concise and ultimately more academic. So let's start off with the wordy example, which is 43 words in length. There were several less intense attacks, but these were the most intense. And although they did not come every day, they came often enough to keep you in such a state of mind that you never knew what your next move would be. All right, so that is actually just one sentence, but it's a needlessly long compound sentence. Okay, it has many clauses in it, independent clauses that we can basically eliminate. So let's take a look at the improved version of that. These, the most intense attacks of all, came, if not daily, at least often enough to keep one under constant strain. Okay, so I want you guys to understand something, and that is that academic writing does not mean needlessly and pointlessly long sentences. Okay, I often have students combine already long sentences to form even larger sentences. Okay, and the end result of that is that I don't know what they're saying. Their ideas are unclear, their paragraphs seem disorganized. Okay, however, if your sentence is long and every word in that sentence has a place and has a meaning, then that's okay, right? That's something that is fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you take a look at this long sentence to the left, okay, with multiple independent clauses, there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of, unnecessary information and words that aren't adding meaning, like there, and many pronouns, these, they, etc. So we don't need all that. Okay, so that's not the way that you construct an academic sentence, by adding meaningless words or words with very little meaning in order to make it artificially long. Okay, so that's something to be avoided. All right, so just like we combine simple sentences, we can also combine clauses and independent clauses or dependent clauses to form fewer clauses and to have a much more condensed, concise, and a tighter sentence, like we have in the example on the right. Another strategy for making our writing more concise, throwing out needless words, is to turn clauses, okay, so clauses, subject and predicate, into noun phrases. Okay, let's look at an example. His sister, who is an employee of the same company. Okay, so that's just not a sentence, just a part of a sentence that we're going to use to illustrate this point. Okay, so who is an employee of the same company is a clause, and in particular, it's a relative or adjective clause. Okay, we can very easily make this more concise by removing the subject, who, and the predicate, is. Okay, and as a result, we have his sister, an employee of the same company. Okay, so we've reduced it by basically 20%, right? It was 10 words, and now we have 8 words. We haven't changed the meaning, we haven't taken away anything from the meaning, but it's shorter, and that's good. If you can say the same thing in fewer words without adding any ambiguity or any misunderstanding, then that should be the goal. All right, let's take a look at the second example. The Battle of Maravar Pass, which was an important battle in the Soviet-Afghan War. Okay, so again, here we have a clause. Again, it's an adjective or relative clause, okay, which was an important battle in the Soviet-Afghan War. The same way that we basically reduced the first clause, we can reduce this clause. So we're going to eliminate which is the subject, and was, which is the predicate, and we're left with the rest of the clause, right? And it's no longer considered a clause because there's no subject and predicate. It's considered a noun phrase. The Battle of Maravar Pass, an important battle in the Soviet-Afghan War. Okay, so it was 14 words originally. Now it is 12 words. We can also make our writing more concise by turning clauses into prepositional phrases. Okay. As soon as summer arrives, we'll go camping every weekend. Okay. So here the clause, the dependent clause in particular, is as soon as summer arrives. Okay. Now we can actually reduce it by simply saying in the summer. In the summer, we'll go camping every weekend. And in the next example, while we were having lunch, she started a debate that lasted all afternoon. Okay? So instead of that entire adverb clause, while we were having lunch, you could simply say during lunch. During lunch, she started a debate that lasted all afternoon. Okay? So that is, saying the same thing, but we've used 3 fewer words. And you might be saying to yourself, well, what's the big deal? 2 words here, 3 words there. It doesn't make much of a difference. Well, think about it. Let's say you go over your essay, which is 1,000 words, okay, and you remove, 2 words. Every 10 words, you remove 2 words, okay? So you basically have, shrunk your essay by 20%, okay? So if it's a 1,000-word essay, basically you've taken out 200 needless words, right? And you've saved the reader from having to read 200 words that basically aren't adding any meaning, okay? And as a result, your writing has become more interesting, okay? It's it's more interesting, it's more academic. There aren't any needless words that distract your reader. Your ideas are being conveyed in a more straightforward manner. Okay, and that's the goal with academic writing. You want to be straightforward, you want to get to the point. We can also make our writing more concise by avoiding certain expressions which are wordy. Okay, so wordy expressions are expressions that don't add any meaning, but they fill space, right? That's what they do. They're wordy. Like, for example, the question as to whether. Okay, so the question as to whether is basically whether, right? You're saying the same thing. It does not add any meaning, saying the question as to whether, right? And the question as to whether is 5 words. So if you can say the same thing in 1 word, why not say it? There is no doubt that. Okay, so this is equivalent to saying doubtless. Used for fuel purposes. There's no need to say purposes because the preposition for already has the meaning of purpose, right? It indicates purpose. So just by saying used for fuel is good enough. She is a woman who. Okay, so again, we can simply say she, right? She obviously refers to a woman, so there's no need to qualify it by saying she is a woman who. In a wise manner. Okay, so manner indicates a way of doing something, right? And we know that an adverb, it also indicates a way of doing something, right? So instead of saying in a wise manner, you could say wisely, okay? And this applies not just wise, but any adjective, right? If you're going to use the word manner after the adjective, you might as well use the adverb form of it. Some other wordy expressions to avoid at all costs are this is a subject which. Okay, you could simply say this subject. His story is a strange one. His story is strange. The thing is that Ali will be late. Ali will be late. One of the things that is important to me is my reputation. My reputation is important to me. These wordy expressions in particular are commonly used when we're speaking, okay? But it's important to point out that the way that we speak is obviously going to be different from the way that we write, especially when it comes to academic writing, okay? So these expressions might be used in speaking, and there's, and especially if it's informal, there's nothing wrong with them. You could use them, they're commonly used, native speakers will use them, but when it comes to academic writing, where every word counts, you want to make sure that every word is adding meaning, okay? So these expressions to the left, half of the words in them are not adding meaning. So therefore, we can express it in a much more concise and academic manner. A very, very common wordy phrase that's used, unfortunately, all too often in academic writing is the fact that, okay? The fact that, to put it quite simply, doesn't add any meaning, that you cannot say in a much more concise manner, okay? So let's look at the first example, owing to the fact that, okay? So you could say that same thing with one word, since or because. In spite of the fact that, again, you could say that with the word although. Call your attention to the fact that. Remind you. I was not aware of the fact that. I was unaware that. The fact that he had not succeeded. His failure. The fact that I had arrived. My arrival. Now, sometimes when students learn these rules and they start writing their first draft, they tend to get overwhelmed because, you simply cannot be aware of all these rules and, consciously all the time, right? So when you're writing your first draft, I don't want you guys to be so much concerned about these rules and think that your first draft has to be perfect, okay? These rules, and especially this rule, number 9, regarding, throwing out needless words, really come into play in your second and subsequent drafts, okay? So when you're looking at your essays the second, third, or fourth time, this is when you should really look at which words or phrases can I eliminate, which expressions can I rephrase so they're more concise, okay? So it's really something that you would consider when you're redrafting and you're looking to, put the final touches and polish up your writing.